Israel song that I began last week, just to get us again getting used to that melody a little bit, the idea David, King of Israel forever. David will be King of Israel forever in the sense that Mashiach will come from David as well. And I had started playing it last week, but I had not optimized the sound. So it's a short song. And the first version that I'm introducing you to is the one we learned in school as children in Hebrew day schools in the early years. And little by little, they started, Rabbi Carlbach came, but here we go. Let's start. Again, thanks so much for being here.
Shalom, Shabbat, Shalom, Shabbat. David, Melech Israel, Chai, Chai, V'kayam. David, Melech Israel, Chai, Chai, V'kayam. David, Melech Israel, Chai, Chai, V'kayam.
And that part, you just got one year of yeshiva kindergarten. If you got that, you got a year of yeshiva kindergarten at a tuition discount you can't beat. Now, we learned that was the classic song of childhood growing up, and children thought they were being very, very clever with all kinds of little variations on it. David, Melech Yisrael, Chai Chai Pizza Pie, and everybody thought that was the funniest thing they ever came up with. When you're 4 years old, it's you don't get lyrics that quality until you start looking at some of the contemporary hip hop and rap music to compare it to David Melech Yisrael, Chai Chai Pizza Pie. So anyway, the diaspora yeshiva, which I assume were basically the kids who grew up with that at age 4, decided in a yeshiva in Jerusalem 15 years later, we got to update this a little and make it a little, it deserves better, at least for grown-ups too. And so I share with you briefly, then we get right back, then we get right into the text. Here's the diaspora yeshiva, which is a yeshiva in East Jerusalem, and here's their version, a more contemporary version thereof. And maybe we'll come back to them a little more later, but we do have to learn also. That's really what we're here for. But as you see, it was an extremely important song. David, King of Israel, lives, and continues to live forever. And that's its message. Now, what does that mean? He continues to live forever. He died at age 70. But the kingship, the monarchy, continues in the house of David and continues through the time of Mashiach. And the Messiah will come from the house of David. And we'll have more to say about that if we have time a little bit later. Let's get into some text. I know you'd like that too. Okay. Now, refreshing your memory very, very briefly, because we want to move forward. That's why we're jumping back in, is that we're in the beginning of chapter 2. David was trying to decide, where am I going to locate? And we talked about all this in great detail last week, so we're going to skim it over really fast, but there's so much deeper, and that's what we did last week. If you missed last week, it's online, or yeah, I think it's already been posted from last week. He didn't know where to set up the kingdom. There never had been a transition of power. Saul was the first and only previous king. Now with Saul having died in battle, no formal process of succession in place, other than David knowing he's been anointed by the prophet Shmuel to be the next king of Israel. He turns to God through the prophet, through the Kohen Gadol, the high Kohen, asks through the Urim and Tumim, where should he go? And God tells him, go to Hebron. First, should I go up to one of the cities in Judah? God says, go up. And should I go to Hebron? Where should I go? God says, Hebron. So David goes up to Hebron with his 2 wives. We know that he's married to Abigail, the widow of Nabal. We spoke about that last week. And along the way, he later picked up Achinoam of Jezreel. And we talked about Israel on Thursday, Jezreel. It's a beautiful place, comes from the word Zerah, Yisrael, that this is the place that God planted, a gorgeous valley in northern Israel, starting around basically Mount Carmel, running through Megiddo, across the entire breadth of northern Israel and the Galilee. And not too far from the capital city of the north, Samaria, Shomron. So he goes with his wives, and his 600 men and their wives and children come with him. And Vayeshvu b'arei Hebron, and they establish Hebron as the capital city. And now that he's in Hebron, the people of the region of Judea, so we talked about that at great detail last week also. We mentioned it still was a unified kingdom, a unified country, not yet a division here. And the 12 tribes, this area, I don't know, call it purple, whatever, raspberry, is Judah, Yehuda. Benjamin, Midyamin, call it pink, was a much smaller tribe and therefore smaller area, but it enjoyed just on its side of the divide with Yehuda, they had the Beit HaMikdash of Jerusalem. Benjamin is part of the greater region of Judah, Yehuda. When there was the divided kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah, Yehuda, Judea, included Jerusalem, namely this portion of Benjamin, but primarily the tribe of Judah. That's why it's called the tribe of Judah. It's not called the tribe of Benjamin, Judah, because it's like 95% Judah, a little bit of Simeon. By contrast, with 10 or so tribes up north, it became known as Israel, because it's the practical name, and it was also the northern kingdom. So until now, the capital has been in Benjamin, primarily in the area known as Givon. Saul had been based in Benjamin. This line roughly here, this is, go a little bit north of this green line to around here. And from here, south is the Judah, Yehuda region. The pink is literally the tribe of Yehuda. A little bit of this green at that point is the Benjamin part. We'll talk more about this map and why it's divided this way. So Saul was based in the Gibeah, Givon, and that's the area that was where the capital was. And Jerusalem just on that border. I might quibble, I might put Jerusalem dot on the other side of that border. And then the famous cities of Yehuda would include Bethlehem, Hebron, Ziklag we learned about already. That was the place that David based himself in Ziklag when he was in the Philistines, remaining distant from the king Achish of Gath. So, and Beersheba, way south in the Negev, also is part of this general region. We'll talk about all this perhaps more today. So David had to know where to start, and God told him, set yourself up in Hebron, sort of square in the middle of the area of Yehuda, your tribal region. And we talked last week that he became the favorite son. We gave the example of the United States presidential candidates who are favorite sons of the state from which they come. And there are reasons for that. They have all their connections there. They invariably favor the state from which they came with more tax money when they get elected, more projects out of not only loyalty, but that's where they come from. And then there are people in that state who have greater access because they know the guy. And that's how it works in politics. So it was a matter of celebration that the center of political power, not just geographical power, has now moved from Benjamin to Yehuda. And therefore, Vayavo Anshe Yehuda, the people of Yehuda, celebrated. They came, Vayimshachuk Sham at David Lamelech al Beit Yehuda. They anointed David, sort of kind of unaware that Samuel already anointed him. But Samuel anointed him, Shmuel HaNavi anointed him, ultimately to be king of all of Israel. At this particular moment in time, these people of Yehuda were anointing him, for all they knew, just to be the king of their region. So they were making him like an American, if we want to use American terminology, be like governor of a state, anointing you to be the governor of Arkansas or Louisiana or New York or California versus president of the United States. And there are 12 or so such states, if you think of each tribe as equivalent to a state, and he's being made the governor of Yehuda, which as far as they're concerned, you're our king. There is no more King Saul. And to the degree we might have assumed Jonathan, his oldest son, would rise to be the next king, he's been killed at battle, as were the other two sons. There's only one last son left. We'll learn about him momentarily. Vayagidu leDavid lemor anshei Aveshgilad asher kavru et Shaul, vayishlach David malachim el anshei Aveshgilad v'yomer lehem baruch Adonai Lashem asher asitem chesed hazeh adonechem imshal v'tikru oto. And then we finally last week talked about the people of Yaveshgilad who had acted heroically to take Saul's corpse down when it was nailed to the wall by the Philistines. They had found Saul's body at the end of the battle in Gilboa, and they decapitated King Saul and his sons, and they hammered, nailed their bodies into the wall in Yaveshgilad. And the people of Yaveshgilad, at the risk of their own lives, if the Philistines would have caught them, in the middle of the night, made it their business to secretly take down those bodies and afford them proper final being laid to rest. We talked about that and how it was done and all of that stuff, all of that, shouldn't really say stuff, all that holy sacrificing. And so David said, you are blessed to God, and God will do good to you, and I will do good to you. And we even talked last week about the fine way of speaking, how David placed God before he spoke of his own intentions, in contradistinction to Malki Tzedek in the book of Breshit, the high priest of that time, before Judaism really had taken hold, and how Malki Tzedek had blessed Abraham when Abraham returned from the battle of the 4 kings over the 5 kings and rescued his nephew Lot and brought back all the wealth that had been taken by the 4 kings. And now Malki Tzedek said that you are blessed of God, and God is blessed for giving you victory. And I talked to you about how the rabbis criticized Melchizedek for blessing Abraham before he blessed God. And David, by contrast, first he speaks of how God will treat you with kindness and justice and truth, and so will I. He puts God first. The Jew always has to be very careful how we speak. Language has great power in Judaism, and the words we speak are very powerful in Judaism. And it sounds, and I accept that for many people, it sounds like a pure superstition. But we believe that you have to be careful what you say and how you say it, because one expression is al tiftach pel satan. Don't say anything that gives the Satan, that gives the prosecutor in heaven an opening to quote you later. There are people who say, I'm never going to do the following. I'm so angry, I will never do that. Don't say that. You never know what kind of curse, God forbid, a person's going to be putting on himself or herself. You never know. You never know. Now, you'll say, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's ridiculous. Come on, Rabbi, you're an educated person. Person gets angry and says to the child, I'll never bring you to a Dodgers game. So they'll never bring you a Dodgers game? What are you talking? You buy tickets next year and you go to Dodge. You don't put bad stuff out there. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. And it might sound silly. At the very least, as an educated person, I could say to you, what do you have to lose by avoiding saying bad things? If you don't put a curse on yourself, at the very worst, so you're superstitious. And I am telling you, there's a lot of literature both ways. And in good ways too. People say, I'm going to do this, and you don't know what's going to happen. And don't put anything on yourself. And don't put it on people other than members of Hamas, I don't know, and the president of Brazil. But don't put it on other people. Let God deal with that. So you have to be very careful what you say. And we always have to be careful. I try always. And call me superstitious, fine, call me superstitious. People say to me, how are you doing all the time I get emails, how are you doing with your lung transplant? I often start to type email, I'm doing great. I don't hit send. I go back, oh, thank God I'm doing great. If I haven't already typed in thank God at the beginning, thank God I'm doing great. How did your appointment go with this doctor, that doctor? Oh, it's fine. Up, go back. How did your x-ray, your CT scan, your MRI? Thank God. God blessed me. At the very least, I sound like a rabbi. But actually, I also sound like an Orthodox Jew, because that's how Jews talk. That's how Orthodox Jews talk. I'm always fascinated. Denise and I were watching season 1 of Fauda. With all that's going on in the Middle East, I decided to refresh my memory of Fauda, season 1. Uncanny how similar it is. It's almost like Hamas watched the season and then planned around it. And then it's almost around like the Israelis figured out, you know what? We think they watched the season, so let's see how it ended. Let's see what to do. So you're watching Fauda, and every Muslim that speaks, every Arab that speaks, and this is how Arabs speak. And good for them. Good for them. Everything is praise the prophet. Praise the prophet. How you doing? Praise the prophet. All of this, all of that. That's fine. That's good. Good. Give all thanks to God. I mean, hopefully you'll do good things with that. But this is a very important thing to take away. And that's what we're doing here. We're learning an interesting story with a lot of interesting rabbinic commentary. And at the same time, we're learning the deeper religious takeaways. It's not Philip Roth, Portnoy's Complaint. It's not even Ernest Hemingway. It's not just literature. It's a book of instruction for life. And too many people, I was just talking to Denise about someone we know who gets up 4:30 every morning and reads the Bible for 30 minutes. And it's very beautiful. But there's so much deeper in the text than just the storyline. You could truly go through chapter 2 and miss the whole point of the subtlety of how David speaks, that he puts God first. And we're going to learn more about that in an opposite way next week, I think, in chapter 3, how Avner, we're going to get back to him, he speaks in the wrong order, and he's punished for it. It's very important to always give thanks to God not to give a reason to the prosecutor in heaven to look and say, gee, this woman is quite confident that it was their doctor or their medical wisdom or that they take their medicine. That's why they're doing well. And we're arguing as prosecutor in heaven, we think we need to teach that person a lesson. I don't want to be the defendant in that case. And so I recommend it for all of you, because if you come to my class, I only want the best for you. First of all, because you're good. And second of all, I need you to attend class. And third of all, because it's really what rabbis do. We teach Torah. Thank God I had rabbis earlier in my life. And I used to sit in Navi class. We all did as kids in high school. And we felt that the Rebbe is wasting our time talking this nonsense and talking all this morality. We want to know what's the story for the exam. And you look back 30, 40 years later, a lot of the story we forgot. Yeah, he killed Goliath with a slingshot. We remember that part. Everything else we forgot. But the lessons the Rabbi Dardak taught, Zichrono Livracha, in class, those things stuck with me for 40 years. Those are things that made me a rabbi. I didn't become a rabbi because David beat Goliath. I became a rabbi because he inspired me by the things he spoke about. It's a great thing if you do it well. If you don't do it well, then you get into that situation where there's nothing worse than a rabbi who's boring. One more quick anecdote, and you've heard this 100 times, and I should really get back to business, but just let me make the point about a rabbi's boring. There's a story about two guys die and they go to heaven, story, and they're judged. Denise and I, you probably think when I talk about what Denise and I do, you probably think, I don't see where this guy is all this time. He watches movie and TV with her all day. It's not so easy. We watch movie and TV between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Don't ask how I do it. So anyway, but we were just watching Heaven Can Wait. Remember the Warren Beatty movie? Great movie. Anyway, so feel good also. So anyway, it just got me reminded. Two guys die. You've probably heard this. They go to heaven. They're being judged. One is a holy rabbi, and the other one is a taxi driver. And they stand online, and they're given to you, and they've been held. The judgment's been handed down. Taxi driver goes to heaven, and the rabbi, unfortunately, we have a different escort for you. I don't understand it. This guy's an ignorant loud. So here's the thing. You were a rabbi with an extraordinary reputation, and you had hundreds of people in your congregation. Every Shabbat, they came to your synagogue inspired to serve God. And during your sermon, you put them to sleep and you left them completely uninspired. This cab driver was a maniac. He never stopped at a red light. He would go through, and the people in the back of his cab, even atheists, would start praying to God, please get me through this drive of life. This man brought more people to God than you did. That's how it goes. So anyway, you got to be careful with everything you do. And is there a point to that story? I leave that to you. Okay, we continue. Drive an Uber. So here we go. And you'll make more than a rabbi, by the way. So with that as background, we now have David ready to set up shop in his capital of Hebron. And he rewards the people of Yavesh Gilad. They will not be forgotten. You may think in Yavesh Gilad, because you live north of Judah, in a region also east of the Jordan River, that you're no longer part of my world, that you're secondary to me. I will always honor you, the Jews of Yavesh Gilad, for what you did to spare the indignity and maximize the dignity of King Saul and his sons. Avner. Very quick refresher. I don't want to spend time because we did the refresher last week. Just didn't have time to carry the refresher to the conclusion. So very, very, very quick refresher. Avner, we met earlier in chapter 26 of 1 Samuel. That was when David was on one side of the mountain. Saul and his army was the other side. He went to sleep at night. David tiptoed with one or two accompanying him. He wanted to send the message once again to King Saul that you're trying to kill me and I haven't done anything wrong and I only want your best and I would never hurt you. And we talked about it in greater detail last week, so we're not going to invest that time now. And instead, simply that David took the spear, you remember, and he walked away with the spear in the canteen, the water canteen that had been at Saul's sleeping like the equivalent of a pillow. went back to his mountain on the other side of the valley, and then called in the middle of the night, wake up, wake up. What's going on? This is David. What about you, Abner? Avner. And that's when we encountered Avner. Also before that, but that was the one I mentioned last week. David shouted, Avner, son of Ner, Abner, aren't you going to answer? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Avner, the chief of staff of Saul, in charge of defending Saul, his and his armies. Who are you to shout at the king? Mi'ata karat el-melech. And David said, who am I? You are a man, aren't you? And there is no one like you in Israel. Mi kamocha b'Yisrael. You're so important, aren't you? No one more important to defend. So why didn't you guard your Lord, the King of Israel? Lama lo shamarta el adonecha hamelech. For one of our troops came to do violence to your Lord, the King. You have not given a good account of yourself. Lo tova davar azer shosita Hashem. Keeping a mavet atem, you deserve to be executed. Capital punishment. You slept on the job and you allowed your king, could have been killed because you did not watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. Look around. Where are the king's spear and the canteen at his head? And Shaul recognized the voice of David. Is that your voice, my son? David, yes, it is, my Lord. And he went on, but why does my Lord continue to pursue his servant? What have I done? What wrong am I guilty of? And please stop running after me all the time. And then let my blood not fall to the ground, etc., etc. And Saul said, I'm in the wrong. You're right. You're safe. It won't happen again. End of that story for now. So we've met Avner before. And now we move forward in the text. Now understand, Avner sort of legitimately had fallen asleep. I mean, let's be fair. It's the middle of the night. They're in an uninhabited area on a mountaintop. There's absolutely no reason necessarily for him to be awake all night. It's perfectly okay that he's asleep. He should have perhaps assigned some people to do guard duty. Should be a night guard. Of course there should be. And we saw what happened October 7. That's why the country has great anger that will play out after the war is over. Whose idea was it not to leave a proper night protection and everything? Okay. But you have to have a night guard. There's a midrash, we won't take out the time now, that God put a deep slumber on everybody in the camp, intending for this to play out the way it did. God wanted David and those accompanying him safely to come into the camp, take the spear in the canteen, get back to the other side without waking anyone up. So it was actually God's miracle that everybody was asleep that way. Regardless, we need to know these things about Abner. Avner was the chief of staff of King Saul, and he was a tzaddik. He was righteous. He was a Torah scholar. It's another thing that does not come out when you simply read the Bible at home on your own. When you read the Bible at home on your own, and this is true of me also, in the text, you have no idea. Me too. There's no sense of how religious, how Torah observant religious these people were. David, if you've ever taken an art history class in high school or college, that Michelangelo sculpture of a naked guy who's got a really perfect physique with his private parts showing. We later learned that Michelangelo was gay, and that's the kind of person, that's his idea of David. And that's what the world thinks when they hear David. David was a tzaddik, and I've told you in some of the previous classes, and I'll tell you again in the future. I won't go into that detail now again. I will in the future, and I did in the past about what a tzaddik he was. Just one refresher of how he would sit in trial, and if he had a rich guy and a poor guy, and the rich guy was right and the poor guy was wrong, he insisted on proper justice, so he awarded the verdict to the rich guy, and then David, out of his own royal treasury, took the money to pay the poor guy's judgment. He was a tzaddik. He was an incredible tzaddik. People have no idea. But so was Avner. Like now you think of a chief of staff. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, I can't think of an Orthodox Jewish chief of staff of Israel. You can't be. They don't allow you. It's politics. and maybe in another 5 or 10 years. But today's current chief of staff, like all the ones preceding, result from the first 40 years that the Labor Party, the secular socialist Labor Party, ran the country like a monopoly until 77. And then Begin continued a lot of that, even though he had won a political earthquake, but he didn't want to shake up the ruling class too badly by the earthquake of the Israeli people shifting to a right-wing government. So all the people that worked their way up over the 10, 20 years, from private to corporal to whatever, to become general, to become chief of staff, almost all of them are either anti-Orthodox or non-Orthodox. They're all secular. Current ones, Herzl Levy and Benny Gantz, Yitzhak Rabin, and the whole bunch of them are all a bunch of people who grew up in the left wing, Moshe Dayan, and many of them get tremendous write-ups in the West, as though they were the great heroes of Israel. But you talk to people in Israel, they have a very, very different attitude of what American Jews have tried to make out of some of these people. Anyway, it goes both ways. You talk to Israelis about Donald Trump, they're ready to make him king of Israel. And even those who support Donald Trump in America, really anyone fair-minded, this is not David Melech Yisrael. And then there are a lot of American Jews who don't like him at all. But in Israel, so, distance makes the heart grow fonder. No man is a prophet in his own land, and all those other expressions. Early to bed and early to rise makes him, okay. So the idea is that Avner is a tzaddik. And you're going to learn with me right now how Avner knew so much Torah and studied Torah so hard that he unfortunately made a terrible mistake in his study of Torah. But this only could happen from someone that learned in Torah and who believed that much in Torah. And this happens. So let's go and see what I'm talking about. But it's important to know, these are extraordinary Torah figures. They're not just politicians. The Avner ben Ner, Sar Tzava Asher LeShaul, Abner, the son of Ner, who was the chief of staff under Saul, had extraordinary loyalty to the family of Saul. Don't think he fell asleep nonchalantly on the job. No one could have been more loyal to Saul and to Saul's entire family line and lineage. And he was determined, when Saul died, to keep the family of Saul on the throne, which causes all kinds of problems and raises all kinds of questions, and we'll answer some of them. Lakach et Ish Boshet. He took Ish Boshet, that's the way the King James does him. Ish means man. Boshet means embarrassed. There are different ways to understand why he's called the embarrassed man, why he had that name. One alteration, man of shame. Another is man of Baal. I don't go for that man of Baal thing. But man of shame, and there are reasons. He was handicapped. And so, in the modern era, there's nothing to be ashamed of if someone's handicapped. But, in those days, it wasn't the same as it is today. And Avner, with the death of Saul, Avner, having survived and fled the disastrous battlefield of Mount Gilboa, after having fought valiantly, took Ish Boshet, the last surviving son of Saul, the other three had died in battle, and he made him the king of Israel. Vaya'avirehu Machanaim, he brought him first to a place called Machanaim. And one by one, he brought him under Avner's personal aegis from town to town, village to village around Israel, because Ish Boshet was not known. He's the handicapped son. Who is he? He's the one who didn't die in battle. So who is he? But everybody knew Avner. Avner is a great hero. Think of the misconception in American Jewry who think that Moshe Dayan was great, or Golda Meir was great. So if Golda Meir or Moshe Dayan, people would give anything to be able to have attended one of their speeches and to get their autograph, except for not Israelis, but American Jews. So in Israel, anybody would have done anything to meet Avner. And if Avner says this guy's the king, then he's the king. And that's what made it possible. He made him the king. Was he unaware that Shmuel HaNavi, Prophet Samuel, secretly had anointed David to be the king? It's a question among the rabbis. We'll learn about it soon today. And he brought him to Gilad, El HaAshuri, to the Asher area, Jezreel, Yisrael, the valley of Jezreel, Ephraim, Binyamin, Yisrael Kula. Let's take a look at the map. Hold on. Give me a map. Okay. So here's what starts happening. I told you earlier today we'd come back to this map and I would try to explain it briefly. Here's where the Jewish nation is being divided. There's a divided nation. It is not the Civil War division that's coming up much later in the book of Kings, where there's the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of the north, capital Shomron, and the kingdom of the south, Yehuda, capital Jerusalem. This is not that. This is a premature, temporary division until this gets sorted out. And obviously, ask yourself, how well do you know the name Ish Boshet, king of Israel? How many songs did they teach four-year-old kids in Jewish nurseries about Ish Boshet, king of Israel, versus David Melech Yisrael? So you know how the story is going to end. With all of the area being either pink or green, it's all going to come under King David's stewardship. But temporarily, initially, in chapter 2, in the immediate aftermath of the disastrous Battle of Gilboa, Avner names and introduces and brings Ish Boshet to Gilad. First Mahanaim. So he first brings him across the Jordan River to the east bank of the Jordan River and well beyond the bank, all the way towards Ammon. And we've mentioned before, modern day Ammon would be the Jordan, its capital city, Amman. And he brings him to Gilad, and he brings him to Jezreel, the Jezreel Valley. We went through this on Thursday night when we talked about Navot and the vineyard that King Achav and Queen Jezebel took from Navot. And we talked about Yisrael, although it sounds like Israel, Yisrael, it's a completely different word. It means God will plant, because it's a gorgeous, fertile valley that stretches the entire way from Mount Carmel all the way to the Jordan River, across the area near the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Kinneret. And it said, Avner brings him to Gilad, Machanaim, all around Gilad. He brings him up to Asher. He brings him to Jezreel. He brings him to the city of Jezreel, across the valley, brings him down a bit. He makes him known. It's like the way they campaign for president of the United States. There's like this thing in Iowa, when they campaign in the first main presidential thing, it's not really a primary, it's a caucus. That's a whole nother story. We're not going to start wasting time on that. But what happens is there's something known as in Iowa that a particular guy who's now that elder statesman, the senator in Iowa, Charles Grassley, it's known as the full Grassley. The full Grassley is a political expression in Iowa, Democrat, Republican. Grassley is famous as like the first guy. He ran for Senate in Iowa as an insurgent running against the incumbent. And he made a pledge at the beginning, he will stop off in every single county in Iowa during his campaign. And he did. And that's known as the full Grassley. And now every 4 years, when the two parties contend for the Iowa caucuses, some of them, usually the ones behind, The ones ahead, they don't have to bother with that. But the ones behind say, well, I want your vote in Iowa, and I'm going to do the full Grassley. That's how much I care about the people of Iowa. And they care about Iowa for like a week. In the following week, they never heard of it. They're in New Hampshire. I care about New Hampshire. That's the place until the next week. Now it's South Carolina. In fact, South Carolina's already forgotten. Now it's Michigan. So, but there, Avner is taking him. It's the idea of the full Grassley. I want to be sure that every single corner of this country, with the exception of Judah, knows that you are the king, and I, who am associated with the prior king, the only king there ever has been, I'm with you 100%. You have my full endorsement. That's very often a big thing to have a politician's endorsement. Very often it doesn't matter. You get all these endorsements, but the other guy wins anyway. But if someone's popular enough, it really does help. It sure helped a lot for Biden to have Obama's endorsement. It didn't hurt Obama to have Clinton's endorsement. Those endorsements were powerful on the Democrat side. And the first George Bush, I don't think we would have gotten elected George Dorcasher if he didn't have Ronald Reagan's endorsement. So endorsements sometimes mean everything. And to have the endorsement of Avner, and that's important to understand what's going on here. And the rabbis are bothered by it, because if he's such a tzaddik, how could he be doing this? Doesn't he understand that it's part of God's plan that David become the king of Israel? So let's take a look at what the rabbis have to say. Let's get that off the screen. Let's take a look at what the rabbis have to say. The rabbis say that Avner learned the pasuk incorrectly. In Genesis, the book of Bereshit, Perek Lamed Hey, Genesis 35. Let's get the context. You know, if you're brand new to the class, you may wonder sometimes, I thought we were only going to I thought we were doing chapter 2. Why are we in Genesis? Why are we here? Why are we there? If I thought everybody here knew every single reference like the back of your palm or whatever, I wouldn't do it. But I want you to fully get the full richness of what's going on. And so I try not to overdo it, but I set context and background so we understand the references. Otherwise, it kind of flies across the head. Now, here's what the setting was in Genesis 35. Our third of our three patriarchs, Yaakov, Jacob, all of his children are now born, with one exception. Essentially, his wife, Leah, has given birth to Reuven, Gad, Levi, and Yehuda. Then Rachel has given her maidservant, Bilhah, who has given birth to Dan and Naphtali. That's 6 kids. Leah sees that Rachel's maidservant gave 2 children to Yaakov, making 6. So Leah, who's no longer giving birth, gives over Zilpah, her maidservant, who gives birth to Gad and Asher. And now Yaakov is 8. God, for reasons we won't get into now, restores Leah's further ability to give birth, and she gives birth to Yisachar and Zevulun. And now Yaakov has 10 children, 6 from Leah, 2 from Zilpah, 2 from Bilhah, 10. But the one he loved most, Rachel, has not yet given him a child. He's still based at his father-in-law and uncle, Lavan. And then Rachel gives birth to Yosef. When Yosef is born, and Yaakov feels that the full circle has been, all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed, everyone is given birth, including Rachel. Yaakov now leaves his cruel father-in-law Lavan with his wives and his 11 children, his 11 sons, and his daughter, Dinah, also born to Leah. And they travel, and he leaves, and it's very dangerous. He is able to get past the region where his former nemesis, his brother Esav, and Esav's 400 men may be lying in wait to kill him. And we studied all of that a few weeks ago when we talked about the 400 Amalekites who got out alive from the Battle of Ziklag. And Yaakov is kind of like a little bit at peace, but then his daughter Dinah gets raped in the city of Shechem, and it's like he never has peace. And God appears to him in Bethel, and prophesies to him in Bethel, and says to him, I'm going to bless you more. And God gives him, first Yaakov prays to God. Let us go up to Bethel, the house of God, literally means house of God. I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress and who has been with me wherever I've gone. When Yaakov first had left his parents' home, pursuing Esau who wanted to kill him. And Yaakov fled to Lavan, his uncle, hoping for the best, not knowing what would be in store for him for the next 20 years. He had stopped off at Bethel, and God appeared to him at Bethel. And so again, he prays to God, and he builds an altar, and God comes to him. God appears to Yaakov on his arrival, and God blesses him with these words. Vayomer lo Elokim, Shimcha Yaakov. God says to him, your name has always been Jacob, Yaakov. Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov ki im Yisrael yihiyeh shmecha. Your name no longer shall be Jacob. You're no longer going to be called Jacob. Yeah, for different contexts, we can't get into it now. We still often talk about the father of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even in our Shmona Esrei, the central prayer of the Jewish every day. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, v'Elokei Yaakov. So we always refer to God as God, to God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But references here and after will primarily be to you as Yisrael, Israel. And that's why we are known as the children of Israel. Otherwise, we'd be known as the children of Jacob. And that's why the country of the children of Israel is named Israel. Otherwise, the war right now would be between Hamas and Jacob. Instead, it's between Hamas and Israel. And Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel. Otherwise, he'd be the prime minister of Jacob. I'm not making a joke. That's what the name would be. We are not called, as I mentioned Thursday, we're not called the children of Abraham anyway, because that also would include the Ishmaelites. And we're not called the children of Isaac, Yitzchak anyway, because that would include the children of Esav. Only one of those two children followed in the footsteps and received the blessing. But we are all called the children of Jacob, or subsequently Israel, because all of his children, every single one, followed in his core values and is part of the blessing. And that's why they all have all those different tribal places. All the sons of Jacob have a tribal place, all of them. The land of Israel, the people of Israel, the children B'nai Yisrael. Okay, continuing here. So God promises Yaakov, your name will be Israel, and here's your blessing. I am Kel Shakai. We don't actually say, just as I said in the beginning of class, we're very careful with our words. We don't invoke God's name unnecessarily. When we say certain words that are only pronouns and not actually God's actual proper noun, even then we have tertiary names rather than the pronouns. So instead of Elohim, we say Elokim. Instead of Adonai, we say Hashem. And here we say like Kale, Shakai. We're very careful how we speak. We speak very, very respectfully of God. And so he says, I'm the God, powerful God. Be fertile and increase. Peru Ravu, Pereu Rave. Have children, and you will become the father of a great nation. And here's the key words. Melachim mechalatsecha yetzeu. Melach is king. Melachim is plural, kings. Chalatsecha, your loins, yetzeu, shall come forth. Kings, plural, will come forth from your loins. Kings, plural, will, future tense, will come forth from you. Okay. The land I assigned to Abraham and Yitzchak, I also assign to you, Yaakov, Yisrael, and to your offspring to come will I assign the land. And that's our claim to the land of Israel. You want indigenous? That's our claim. The land was promised to us. And any Muslim who comes and says, well, we're the children of Abraham. Yes, you are the children of Abraham, but it was not subsequently promised to Ishmael. And your own Quran says as much. It was promised to Isaac. Okay. So God prophesies, kings shall come forth from you. Avner ben Ner, Abner the general, a Torah scholar, learned that pasuk. And he said, that pasuk tells me only one thing. That verse tells me God was speaking to Yaakov, Jacob, Israel, after Jacob already had the first 11 of his 12 children. Even Joseph, they're all born. There was only one child remaining, and the prophecy is that kings, plural, shall in the future come forth from you. Avner interpreted that to mean there will be a prophecy from God to Yaakov. You will have a further child, a future child, and kings, plural, shall come from that child. Not only one king, not melech, mechalatzecha yetzei, but melachim mechalatzecha yetzei. If you know the Hebrew, not one king will come forth from your future child, but kings, plural. Right after that is the very sad story of how Rachel goes into labor and dies having Benjamin. They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrat, Rachel went into child labor, a hard labor, and she gave birth to Benjamin. She breathed her last, she was dying, and the child was named Ben-Oni, but the father named him Benjamin. The name Ben-Oni means the son of my pain and travail, and Yaakov Yisrael did not want that to be the name from now on, constantly to raise a boy with a name that reminds him he killed his mother, obviously inadvertently, but that his death killed his mother, that your mother's last words essentially are, you're the child of my travail. So he renamed him Aviv Koralo Binyamin. But Tomat Rachel Vatikaver B'derech Ephrata. Rachel died, is buried on the road to Ephrat in Bethlehem. That's Bethlehem. And that's where you go and find Kever Rachel, the grave site of Rachel to this day. Over her grave, Yaakov set up a pillar, and later it was built into a much larger monument, which is Kever Rachel to this day. Okay. So in Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash, in Perek Petbet 82, chapter 82, we learn as follows. Rabbanan Amri, the rabbis are bothered and ask. Literally, it means they say, but it means the way that the way Torah is taught in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Midrash, very often is with question and answer. Instead of an outright statement, the way it often is taught is that the text will ask a question, or the rabbis ask a question, and here's the answer. And that's the style. And that's part of that's, I don't know if it's true, but the stereotype that Jews answer a question with a question. I don't know whether that's true. Is it true that Jews answer a question with a question? Ask yourself. Did Jews answer questions with a question? Who knows? So anyway, we continue. Efshar Avner, Adam Tzaddik, can it be that Avner was a man of such righteousness, and yet, V'hu cholek al malchut Beit David, and yet he created the rift with the house of David to coronate Ish Boshet, the other son of Saul, as a competing king over the much, much greater territory? Because after all, David was left with this initially, and Avner coronated Ish Boshet over this. How is it possible that such a righteous man could have done that? Ela Midrash Dorish. The problem is, the answer is, he was righteous, and he perhaps misinterpreted a midrash, or perhaps he correctly interpreted the midrash and felt it was his duty to fulfill it. V'himlichet Ish Boshet, and he made Ish Boshet melech, a king. He said, Hadahu dichtiv. He said, what does it say in the Bible? Umelachim echalatzecha yetzeyu. God prophesied to our father Yaakov, Israel, kings, plural, will come from your loins in the future. And Avner said, who's the plural? Zeh Shaul v'ish Boshet. Shaul was only one king, but the prophecy is two, so there had to be at least one more king from that family. Well, you could say, well, maybe it's a prophecy that kings in the future will be coming forth, and David also came forth from Yaakov's loins, only not through the son Benjamin, but from the son Yehuda. But Avner interpreted the verse to mean not only that kings in the future will come forth, that your people Israel will not be limited only to one king in all their history, but there will be many, 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 many kings. Avner further interpreted, maybe misinterpreting, that there will be plural of kings coming from a child who is yet to come forth. And therefore, he took upon himself to see to it that Ish Boshet became the king. Explained out just a little bit more by Abarbanel, or Abravanel, one of the great biblical commentators. Abravanel was an extraordinary person. Can't take out much time on it now, but it would be almost a sin, so to speak, not to just tell you briefly in a few sentences Abarbanel. Abarbanel's not just any old commentator. Don Isaac Abarbanel was the Secretary of the Treasury of Spain under Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. Can you imagine that? Orthodox, not only an Orthodox Jew, but an Orthodox rabbi, not only an Orthodox rabbi, but one of the greatest all-time Torah scholars and rabbinic commentators in history. Was the Secretary of Treasury, Minister of Finance under Ferdinand and Isabella. I haven't looked it up, but he probably was involved in writing the check to Christopher Columbus that allowed him to buy the Nina Pinta in Santa Barbara, or whatever it is, Santa Maria. And he was an extraordinary man. Isabella and Ferdinand, as you may know, by 1492 decided to expel the Jews from Spain in the aftermath, or as part of the Spanish Inquisition. They expelled all Jews from Spain, not just some Jews, all Jews that they could identify and whom they otherwise had not killed out as Moranos or Conversos. Don't want to get into that. They said one exception. They said Don Isaac Abarbanel can stay. They needed him. They had a Jew running the treasury. A Jew always knows how to turn a profit. It's interesting. You see the stereotype, and frankly, it's anti-Semitic. Frankly, it's to think that Jews uniquely know how to handle money. Under Obama, every one of his secretaries of the Treasury was a Jew. The guys who headed the bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, Jews. Under all the president, they always named Jews to head the bank. Biden, they got this Janet Yellen. They're all Jews. It's a country with 2% Jews, but it's like every single person who gets named to head the Federal Reserve Bank is a Jew. You think that doesn't cause anti-Semitism among the anti-Semites who look for that stuff? You think it doesn't even annoy me? You think isn't even crazy? We're $34 trillion in debt. You would think at some point they would let a non-Jew try. So Spain told Abarbanel, you're the one exception, we want you to stay. And he clearly knew how to invest. He bought ships for Columbus. Look what the guy did. Abarbanel said, I go with my people. And he left. He left Spain. He walked like he was in his 70s or 80s, and he walked. They didn't have cars or limousines. He walked on foot like a march of Bataan. And he marched out of Spain with the Jewish people. And he gave up everything that he had in this world so that he could be with the Jewish people. And he's remembered for century 1492. He's remembered 550 years later, and in our class as well. He learned out to see Persha Avner Sar Tzava Yisrael Lakachet Ish Boshet ben Shaul. He says, it talks in the text that we're learning tonight. This is Abarbanel commenting that, and he wrote in Hebrew. He was obviously fluent in Spanish as well. It says in our text that Abner made Ish Boshet the king. Be'eviro to Machanayim. He brought him to Machanayim. Shehayabim saw Givul Shnei Hashvatim V'chetzi. And that was right smack in the middle of the region east of the Jordan River where 2.5 of the tribes were, Reuven, Gad, and half of Menashe. Shaharei Machanayim Haya Gavul B'nei Dan Uvnei Menashe. And Machanayim was a very important place to launch Ish Boshet's authority, because by putting him in Machanayim, by bringing him not here initially, but here, he went with the 2.5 tribes. Again, there were 2.5 tribes. Reuven, Gad, this is the Jordan, and half of Menashe. And the other part of Menashe was on the other side of the Jordan. And in the middle of this region of 2.5 tribes, smack in the middle, Machanayim. And that's where Abner brought Ish Boshet to launch him. And he says he brought him from there. And then beyond that, V'afal pi sheyada, Avner, Hamshachat David al Yedei Shmuel HaNavi, Ayin Hey Olav Shalom. And Avner says that, Abarbanel says that Avner knew that Samuel had anointed David, was not unaware about the secret anointing. Even though he knew about the anointing of David by Samuel the prophet of blessed memory, and this goes back to what I was telling you at the beginning of class, how we speak reverentially about God, about people. You referred to the prophet Samuel of blessed memory. Hine, or may he rest in peace. Hine hishtadel ha'amid malchut Shaul al banav kafi kocho. Even though Abner knew that Samuel, the prophet of blessed memory, had anointed David to be king, Avner did everything in his power to continue establishing the house of Saul, kafi kocho, everything in his power to keep them in the monarchy. V'himlichuhu b'chol hamakomot asher avar bahem echad li'achad ad sheba'achrona himlicho al kol Yisrael. And he brought him, as we saw, from location to location, from Gilad up to Asher, up to Jezreel, all through every inch. I talked about the full Grassley, till he came back down to where Saul himself had been in Givon and Givah. He brought him everywhere. I'll call Yisrael until he had become the king and accepted everywhere except for by Judah. Umipnei zeh sipir ha'hamlacha bifrat v'achar kach bichlal. And then Abarbanel explains what I've been teaching you. He wraps it all together very nicely. Vav Beis Beis Reish. There are always a lot of abbreviations in rabbinic texts. Bebrachus Rabbah. And in the Midrashic text, Bereshit Rabbah, which we just studied, Amru, the rabbi said in chapter 82, they quoted what I just read you in Genesis 35, the blessing of God to Jacob, Yisrael, that kings would come forth from his loins. Vayomer Elokim al Yaakov, what does it say in chapter 35? I read it to you. God said to Jacob, Ani Kel Shakai, I am the Almighty God, Parei Urvei, be fruitful and multiply, Goyu Kahal Goyim, great assemblage of nations. The word Goy means nation. Israel, the Jews, also are a Goy. It's a matter of modern street language to refer to the word non-Jews as goy, because it turns two syllables into one syllable. From non-Jew to goy is one syllable. People like to shorten things. But goy means nation. Jews are called a goy also. Mika amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. We say in the Shabbat Mincha Amida, Jews are a nation too. So, Mikan Dorash Avner, and from that verse, in chapter 35, verse 11 of the book of Genesis, Breshit, Abner studied and inferred a midrashic understanding, V'korav Ish Boshet ben Shaul, and he approached Ish Boshet, the son of Saul, and he said, Amar, Kitivu Malachim Michalachet Secha Yetzeyu. He said, it is written that God told Yaakov that kings in plural will come forth, will in the future come forth. And Avner says that's referring to children from Benjamin. Ba'al Binyamin Omar, that must be referring to the offspring of Benjamin, not to the broader offspring of the 12 tribes. Shelo nolad adayin, because Benjamin had not yet been born solely among the tribes. And the word is Yetzeyu, they will come forth, they will come forth. V'yarachshav lo amad bi Binyamin el Shaul. And with the death of Saul, Avner was inferring midrashically, there's been only one king that's come out of the house. So there must be, to fulfill God's prophecy, a second king from the house of Saul. Therefore, notwithstanding that David was anointed by Samuel, Lefichach lakach Ish Boshet v'himlicho el hagilad. Therefore, Avner took Ish Boshet, made him the king, and the mindset was, I will do what I have to do, and God, if he has some other plan, God will do what God has to do. I now very rapidly just close with one or two verses without any kind of deeper analysis now to wrap up this part of our study for today. Ben Arba'im Shana Ish Boshet ben Shaul b'malcho Yisrael. Ish Boshet was made king at age 40. Note that magic number 40. For Noah, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Moshe was on the mountain, 40 days and 40 nights getting the Torah. Moshe was a multiple of 40, age 80, when he began his ministry to tell Paro to let the people go to serve God. He served 40 years till his age 120. And I could go on and on and on. So Ish Boshet was age 40 when he became king of Israel by virtue of Avner. Ushtayim shanim molach, and he reigned only 2 years. The Hebrew does not say only. I'm adding the word only. He reigned 2 years. Ach Beit Yehuda hayu acharei David. But throughout those 2 years that Ish Boshet reigned as king over 11 of the 12 tribes, or 12 of the 13, depending on how you count Menashe, Ephraim, and Yosef, Yehuda alone refused to go along. And that's how you end up with this mount. Everyone accepted Ish Boshet for 2 years. What happened? We'll talk about it next week. As I close right now, I closed just 3 more minutes with the other more contemporary version of that song. We began with David Melech Yisrael, and we end with that David became the king of Israel, and Shlomo Carlebach wrote the definitive version. There are various melodies, but this became the definitive version. And just take out about 2-3 minutes, and here we go.
Shalom. Ein kemochem, ein k'am Yisrael. Ein k'am Yisrael. למרות שאני ואתם, אנחנו אוהבים את כל העולם כולו, אין כעם ישראל שאוהב את כל העולם.
There's no one like the nation of Israel.
אבל אין כעם ישראל.
But there's no one like Israel.
אין כעם ישראל. רבותיי, עם הרבה שמחה ממש עם כל הלב, שמונה.
My dear friends, I am bringing you this song with joy in my heart.
Abarbanel, melech Yisrael, Abarbanel, Yisrael, David melech, melech Yisrael, melech Yisrael, Mevekaya, Mevesema, Semeto, Mazel tov. Vayelanu kol Yisrael. Hey! La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. David Melech, Melech Yisrael. David Melech, Melech Yisrael. David Melech, Melech Yisrael. Melech Yisrael. Kalekaya. Sema, Sema, Tov. Mazel, Mazel, Mazel Tov. Ayelanu Kol Yisrael. Amen.
I wanted to introduce you to that melody. I'll have more to say about that next time, but we're a little bit over time. Thank you for being here. And I'm telling you, you inspire me. I have taught, I really mean this. I really mean it. And those who have had the misfortune of going through all my years and years of teaching, I have taught, this is my third time around teaching all the books of the prophets. I have never taught it with this much excitement, and I've never gone this deeply into it. And I was always afraid if I go more deeply into it, I may lose the crowd who are interested in just knowing the story. And I'm very blessed. Thank God, as I said at the beginning of the class, very blessed that that with the magic of Zoom and the ability to reach out to a broader audience, God has blessed me that I've been able to find, and each and every one of us, we've been able to find people who want to really learn the story. Not only the story, you want to know David and Goliath, go on Amazon Prime and look up the Saturday morning cartoon and let the dog go, Davy. Denise does it better than I can. And yes, we spent at least 3 30-minute periods in the course of our marriage watching 3 episodes of Davy and Goliath in between episodes of Heaven Can Wait and everything else. I don't know how I studied this. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're part of this and that you inspire me to go to extra time and effort to really, I'm teaching the best material I've ever taught. I'm not saying I'm the best teacher, but it's the best material. I can't believe that on a second wind after the lung transplant, I'm like learning a whole new Torah. And so thank you so much for being here. And we are over